Bonjour, collègues.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to all. We'll be continuing where we left off last Thursday. Mr. Bachrach had the floor. He had just presented a motion. Mr. Bachrach, good morning. You want to be on the list as well? Okay. Mr. Bachrach, you have the floor. You still have the floor. So please go ahead.
I'm going to plug in my headset just in time for you to start speaking English, Mr. Chair.
With you presenting moving a motion.
Yeah.
And you had the floor, so you still have the floor.
Oh, this is showtime. You're calling us to order.
Absolutely, yeah.
It looked like people were still getting themselves collected, and no, okay. You wanted me to rush through this? I was going to ease into it. It's Tuesday, folks. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And at the last meeting, I moved the motion that had been put on notice, and perhaps I'll start by just repeating it for folks who are watching. That given the importance of freshwater ecosystem services to the prosperity, sustainability, and resilience of British Columbian communities, and given the increasingly severe impacts of climate change, including drought, wildfires, and floods, the committee urged the federal government to work with the government of... Too fast?
Non, j'ai pas la...
Okay.
Sorry, excusez-moi. Je pense que j'ai pas la traduction.
Can we just test this to see if... est-ce que vous m'entendez? Do you hear me now, Madame Posey?
OK, c'est correct.
Bon, okay.
Okay. Could I just pick up where I left off, I suppose? That the committee urged the federal government to work with the government of British Columbia to establish a $1 billion watershed security fund, that the committee report this to the House, and that the government table a written response. Now, this stemmed from some really compelling testimony that we had from Mr. Zeman, the executive director of the BC Wildlife Federation. And he talked to the committee about how his organization has been working in partnership with First Nations and landowners on hundreds of watershed restoration projects across the province, and I think it's some really exciting work. This uses the term watershed security, and maybe the best place to start is by talking about what this concept of watershed security is. What we're talking about when we say watershed security is really rebuilding the natural defenses of our watersheds. We know that there's so much literature out there on the importance of natural infrastructure. And we know that natural systems are some of our best defenses against climate change and the extreme weather that we've been seeing more and more. So watershed security is really about rebuilding those natural defenses, bolstering collaborative monitoring, so engaging communities and First Nations in data collection and going out on the land and in the watersheds and observing what's happening so that we are better informed and better able to respond when things change. And strengthening watershed governance in partnership with the province's First Nations and local governments. And in British Columbia, there's been a long history of this work, and the opportunity right now is really to bring some significant resources to bear so that the organizations and communities that want to do this work are supported by the federal government. This is has huge potential for job creation. We're talking about the potential for thousands and thousands of well-paid jobs in communities. Some of this work is already taking place. And we know that the cost of not doing this is also very significant. In British Columbia, people are well aware of the devastating impacts of wildfires over the past number of years, of flooding, the atmospheric river that hit in the Lower Mainland and caused extensive damage. We do have the potential to mitigate these effects if we act swiftly, and if we put in place the structures that are required to bolster natural infrastructure and make sure that our watersheds are resilient. And of course, in British Columbia, top of mind for many folks is the health of wild salmon stocks. And this work around resilience and around building watershed security also has the benefit of protecting and enhancing our wild salmon that are so important to our economy and to First Nations. So that really gets to the heart of what this motion is about. Now, the government of BC has already invested over $100 million in watershed security. And the potential here is to build that into $1 billion fund, not with the federal government contributing the balance, but with a sizable matching contribution from the federal government, increased contributions from the provincial government, and the leveraging of private investment as well, so that together these three parties could put together the funds to really sustain this work into the future. I know this is an initiative that the BC government is very excited about. First Nations are very excited about, and when we talk about climate change and when we talk about securing watersheds, it's relatively rare that we get such broad support from across all of the different sectors, from across different governments, from across the political spectrum. And so when we see that kind of alignment, I think it really behooves us to get behind those efforts and to support them with significant resources. So that's why I'm excited about this. It's why I brought forward the motion after Mr. Zeman's testimony before the committee. I know we're going to have other witnesses that appear before this committee on this study, and we did hear from Watersheds BC at our last meeting. I know, unfortunately, the witness's testimony was cut short, and I wasn't able to ask the questions that I wanted to ask of the witness, but hopefully the presentation that she made had an impact on the committee. And hopefully we'll hear from more folks from my home province who are passionate about this work. And my hope today is that we can debate this motion and hopefully pass it so that the government can know that the committee supports moving forward with this vision. I think it's a really positive vision. I think it could have a tremendous impact on the province of British Columbia and the watersheds that sustain our communities. So, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it at that for now, and perhaps I can offer some more thoughts later in the debate.
Thank you. I have Mr. Van Couverden, Mr. Mazier, Mr. Longfield. Mr. Van Couverden and Madame Chatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I start, because I think that has there been anything modified, Mr. Bachrach? Have there been any changes to it?
No, they haven't.
No, as we discussed, we are in favor of this motion. As it's written, we would like one small change, and that's just to provide a written report and basically remove the section on reporting it to the House. But all in all, we're very supportive of it. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about with respect to this motion, and in the context of our debate in the last couple of meetings. And I'll touch on the sort of constitutionality of looking at watershed. I think that we are all aware of a hydrologic cycle and how water travels across borders, knows no boundaries, and the importance of ensuring that we are protecting our most vital resource, both in British Columbia and elsewhere. I'll provide a reflection on Ontario's maintenance of our greatest natural resource, which is fresh water. My personal reflections, not necessarily professional ones. I'm not a scientist, but we have had some really great water scientists here at this committee recently, and my observation as somebody who spent a lot of time on the water in Ontario is that we're really lucky to have conservation areas. We're really, really lucky to have conservation authorities doing the work to do the science, collect the data, look at restoration, develop a base of knowledge around endangered and threatened species. Just recently, in the new Parks Canada development at Rouge Urban National Park, we visited a farm an organic farm which was having some problems with their water table. They were finding that every spring they weren't able to start planting until later in the season than some of their neighbors. And the Conservation Authority came by and they determined that if the creek that runs adjacent to the property ran a little bit slower for one reason or another, that their water table would dry up just a little bit earlier in the spring, and they'd be able to plant 3 to 4 weeks earlier. So they did this restoration project, and not only did this provide better drainage for the fields, which are in excess of 30, 40 acres. They plant tons and tons of varieties of vegetables. They also found that there were fish species and turtles and frogs that moved into this little area just adjacent to their farm. And since it's an organic farm, they had no concerns about any sort of contamination or anything like that. So conservation areas do fantastic work. So when posed with the question, why British Columbia, obviously my colleague is from British Columbia, the question might arise, why is this more of a priority for British Columbia than others? I would say that it's also a priority for Ontario, but we have an asset, and that asset is our conservation authorities, and the science and the work that they do in tree planting, in habitation or in habitat restoration is really, really extraordinary. And I don't know if anybody, we're entering into the holiday season and people are starting to put up their Christmas trees, and I don't know if anybody else on the committee has this experience in their local community, but in Halton Conservation actually asks you to drop off your Christmas tree after the season. Take the tinsel and all the decorations off, obviously. But the Christmas trees are really, really useful for habitat restoration, to create berms and to provide a barrier between different species. I visited the Royal Botanical Gardens between Hamilton and Burlington recently and found that they were using their Christmas trees to do that work. And I actually saw this huge line of discarded Christmas trees that were providing a barrier, habitat restoration, and they're just doing extraordinary work. So, we're lucky in Ontario that we have these conservation authorities, but it's something that I think other provinces could emulate. But I do think that we're lucky in Ontario. Now, moving on to the sort of constitutionality of looking into pollution, looking into how pollution impacts our communities, but particularly Indigenous communities. Something that was raised by my colleagues from the Conservative Party, and I was told to consider running, I think we were all told to consider perhaps running in Alberta politics if we are concerned about Alberta population, or Alberta pollution, and the impacts of on Alberta, the impacts of it on the population of Alberta. Now, I'm concerned about pollution outside of Halton region, not just because I'm concerned about all Canadians, but I also know that pollution knows no boundaries. It doesn't care about borders. Pollution in Halton, whether that's airborne or waterborne, will enter water systems, and those water systems will then have an impact down the water cycle on millions of people. But I did spend some time reflecting on the comments with respect to whether or not it was useful for a committee in the federal government to study, pollution specific to one particular region, or to call on an energy regulator from one particular province to change their behaviors, or to modify their practices, or reconsider a little bit their work. So I did look, and I provided my colleague from the Conservative Party with an email regarding the federal subject matters. And these are, en français, les domaines de compétence fédérale.
And these are federal areas of competence and jurisdiction.
Clear to me that our study is with respect to our jurisdiction, and we are well within our rights and our domains to be looking at how pollution impacts various communities, but specifically Indigenous communities. And that's because federal matters can include, on the basis of most federal jurisdictions, and I'll just read it, over environmental issues, including one, public property, which means federally owned public property.
How long do the Liberals plan on filibustering for?
I don't know exactly where this is heading. I'm just wondering, I do question a little bit the relevance of the comments. Maybe, Mr. Vancouverdin, you could explain how this connects to Mr. Bachrach's motion. I mean, I saw a hint of that when we talked about watersheds and pollution from the sky, which gets into a watershed. In fact, when we were studying oil sands development in 2007, I keep going back to that. One of the vectors in the study was the notion that pollution from the industry is going into the air and getting into the water through the air, as opposed to seeping into the water from tailings ponds at the time. But so it is relevant in that respect. But a good chunk of what you're saying is I'm not sure how it connects. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to maybe say how it connects to the motion.
Yeah, certainly. So Mr. Bachrach's motion makes recommendations to one province, British Columbia. We recently had one energy regulator from one other province in Alberta, and the question was raised by some members of the Conservative Party whether or not we ought to even be in the business of making recommendations to provincial authorities. And I think we ought to. I think we ought to recognize that every province is quite different with respect to how they do this work. I gave some examples of in Ontario. I apologize if my stories took a little bit long. I went for a nice long run this morning. I'm quite relaxed, feeling very zen, so perhaps I'll try to tighten up my comments a little bit. But I do think it's pertinent to really consider, Canada's basically 13 countries that tries really hard to be one. And we achieved that. Canada's a great country, but we're very, very unique in the context that there really isn't that much, connecting maybe the economy of the Yukon to the economy of Prince Edward Island. And by the same token, with respect to Mr. Bachrach's motion, we are, through this motion, making recommendations or considering one province above all others, above all other 12 provinces and territories. And in the previous work that we've undertaken with respect to the Alberta Energy Regulator, it was posed that perhaps if we want to be making recommendations to one specific province, we should get involved in provincial or territorial politics. I don't think that's necessary for the following reasons. Because federal subject matters can include public property, which means federally owned property, which could include parkland or crown land, fisheries, both marine and freshwater, navigation and shipping, anything with respect to criminal law, and any issue that impacts First Nations people. And in this very old document, I should read it verbatim. Granted, it uses old language that we've updated, Indians and land reserved for the Indians. Of course, we recognize that's outdated language that we don't use anymore. But in addition to that, the opening words of Section 91 of the Constitution Act of 1867 set out federal residual power. That means that numerous legal decisions have interpreted this power to mean that various subject matters not explicitly listed in the Constitution, such as marine pollution and interprovincial water pollution, are nevertheless within all of our federal jurisdiction. So it's very clear that we have the jurisdiction, we have the actual authority and the obligation as a federal government, but also as a committee in this government, to be looking at marine pollution and interprovincial water pollution. So what that means to me is that
I really do wonder how long he's going to filibuster for. We're talking about water ecosystems and not about pollution, if he refers to the motion. There's nothing about pollution at all.
No, I mean, pollution is an issue within ecosystems, of course.
It's not about the motion, though.
I agree. It's
As long as he can keep his filibuster to the,
I agree that
to the comment
it's getting
there, it'd be fine.
getting far removed from the motion. I would just ask again, Mr. Vancouverdin, that maybe you narrow the focus a little bit.
Okay. My reflections was less on whether or not the pollution with respect to the ecosystem was something that we ought to be considering. It was whether or not one specific province. No, my amendment was simply how we deal with the information that we're going to gather and then provide to the government and what we expect in return. And that's it. I agree with the notion that our committee ought to have the latitude to make recommendations to one specific province or multiple provinces at any given time, that because I think it, with respect to pollution, with respect to ecosystems, with respect to water, or with respect to Indigenous peoples, specifically First Nations, I think it's quite pertinent to the jurisdiction of our federal government, but also the topics that this committee is to look at. So the issue that I was focused on, and I will continue to focus on for a moment, is whether or not our committee ought to be looking at particular provinces. I still continue to be of the strong opinion that any conduct of the Alberta Energy Regulator and whether or not they can do their work.
Sorry, a point of order from Mr. Leslie.
My colleague across the way said he planned to support the motion with amendment. I'm just wondering how long he plans to speak in broad general terms without actually moving the amendment so we could move forward with committee
I don't
business.
think that's a point of order. It's an opinion or a question, but not a point of order.
Thank you. I think it's important that we know what the sort of guardrails of our work is. In the last meeting, it was called into question whether or not we ought to make recommendations to one specific province. At that time, it was Alberta. I sensed a little bit of defensiveness from my Conservative colleagues with respect to Alberta. We can use our imaginations as to why that might be the case, but the fact remains that if we're going to have a look at whether or not we ought to do something
Another
similar
point of
with
order?
British Columbia.
Is it a point of order? Yes.
I really do take offense to that. I'm not from Alberta. I stand up for all the provinces in Canada.
Well, that's a point of offense. It's not a point of order.
There you go.
Fair.
Yeah.
I apologize if I offended anybody, but I do sense occasionally that that there are members of certain parties that are, and they may applaud when I say they're more ardently, opposed to any action that might limit the abilities of oil companies and oil and gas companies and energy companies to do the work that they have in the same way that they have ongoing. And that's problematic, because as we heard from the Alberta Energy Regulator, it's just not working. People are being negatively impacted by the pollution caused through these massive oil and gas extraction projects. And I think it is certainly part of our work to be focused on.
Yes, the point of order?
So really, filibuster, let's get back onto the motion. We need to get this.
Again, it's not a point of order. It's not a point of
Well,
order.
it's not relevant. Talking about a.
Okay, you're
Alberta
questioning
Energy.
relevance. Yes, I've asked. Now, I've asked Mr. Vancouverton to narrow the focus. Now, I don't think there's any issue with the federal government focusing on a particular province. I mean, we come to agreements with provinces all the time. We do this in agriculture, which is kind of a joint jurisdiction. But anyway, Mr. Vancouverton, go ahead, but please mind the guardrails on this, please.
Okay. Thank you. And I would just observe that I was only just responding to the point of order from my colleague when I got point of ordered again, saying I ought to stay on topic. So I will try to stay on topic with respect to this motion in particular. And with that, I think I will table the amendment that we simply drop the clause in there about Mr. Bachrach, if you'll indulge me. I don't have it just in front of me. Perhaps it's a friendly amendment. If we can simply drop the section that we report this to the House, that simply with the government of British Columbia to establish a $1 billion watershed security fund, and the government table a written response. If that's satisfactory as a friendly amendment, does everybody agree?
So I don't have the text in front of me. I do actually, but let me just. So can you just tell us what the amendment is? Could you just spell it out again?
So perhaps I'll just read it from the beginning.
Yeah.
That given the importance of freshwater ecosystem services to the prosperity, sustainability, and resilience of British Columbian communities, and given the increasingly severe impacts of climate change, including drought, wildfires, and floods, the committee urged the federal government to work with the government of British Columbia to establish a $1 billion watershed security fund, and that the government table a written response.
Taking out that the committee report this to the House. That's the amendment.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
just committee business, and I think the
Okay.
committee ought to make
Okay.
that recommendation
So-
on our own 2 feet.
Okay, so this is an amendment to the motion, which we can now debate. Does anyone want to speak to this? I mean, if there's general agreement to doing this, we don't have to have a big debate on it, but how do you feel about this? Yes.
So, Mr. Chair, and I think through you to Mr. Vancouverton, thanks for the amendment. You know, I do favor the idea of reporting to the House and having the government table a written response. But really, the goal here is to try to build support around the table and to get this motion passed and to speak as a committee. And so if Mr. Vancouverton feels that striking the one clause of the motion will bring him on board and allow him and his colleagues to support the motion, I'm happy to do that. I think the important thing is that we have the debate and that as a committee we're able to express to the government, even if we're not tabling it in the House formally, that we express to the government, and I would hope that they're listening intently to our deliberations today. And of course, we have the parliamentary secretary here contributing to that debate. I think that's the key thing. So I'm happy to either accept it as a friendly amendment or we can vote on it. Maybe a vote would be more appropriate, Mr. Chair, and then.
I mean, so do we have any other speakers on this amendment? Can we just vote on it? Pardon?
Could we have the amendment read back?
Ben, en fait, tout ce qu'on fait là, c'est on biffe.
Well, in fact, all we're going to be doing here is striking one sentence that the committee report to this House. Report this to the House. That's the amendment being proposed by Mr. Vancouverton. Can we vote on it?
Does anyone object to this?
As indicated, I object, but in the interest of building consensus, if it's unanimous, I'm not going to stand in the way
Let
of
me
you.
put it this way.
Do I seem like
Hypothetically,
that
if we had
objectionable
a
guy? No.
vote, would you vote for this amendment?
I'm inclined to vote against it because I like the idea of tabling it in the
Okay,
House.
so we're going to
but
have a vote.
I think there are enough votes.
Yeah, we're going to have a vote. We're going to have a vote. Let's have a vote. Get it on the record.
Mr. Ali,
Yes.
Madame Chatel, Mr. Longfield,
Yes.
Ms. Taylor-Roy,
Yes.
Mr. Vancouverton,
Yes. Vote for my own amendment.
Monsieur Dautel,
Pour.
Mr. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Leslie, Mr. Mazier,
Yes.
Madame Posey,
Oui.
and Mr. Backrack.
No.
Okay. So if the amendment doesn't pass, we go back to the main motion. I have a whole list of people on the main motion. I just want to make sure that everyone wants to remain on the list. I have Mr. Mazier? No, the amendment.
Yeah, the amendment passed.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have Mr. Mazier, Mr. Longfield, Madame Chatel, Madame Posey, Mr. Backrack on the main motion as amended.
Yeah, and I think it's very good. Thank you, Mr. Backrack, for bringing this motion forward. He touched on getting back to his original kind of speech, inaugural speech, when we kicked this committee meeting off. Touched on a lot of different key words as far as rebuilding, natural defenses versus man-made defenses. I think that's really good language and things to be working on in general when it comes to landscape management. Watershed security, that's another good term. I like that one. Watershed governance. I think the reality is in salmon stocks, of course, that's always important to BC. And, job creation. I think that's the only one. I think if I was kind of questioning reflecting on what you had to say there, I mean, creating the jobs that are going to be created out of that, and maybe you can comment a little bit more on this, is they're going to be government jobs at the end of the day. Are they going to be actually, or are those people actually going to be creating more things at the end of the day to contribute to our gross domestic product? I think that's always been a conversation when we come down to managing the landscape and talking about conservation. Is it really a new job, or is it just a matter of this is how mankind's going to live on the landscape and we need these kind of jobs? So I don't know if I'd hang my hat on the job creation part of it, but as far as the rest of the, what this fund would do and what all the things that need to be addressed on the landscape, I think is a good motion, and I think we should vote on it.
But we can't vote because we have a list. So we'll go to Mr. Longfield, then Madame Chatel, Madame Posey, Mr. Bachrach, and Mr. Van Koeverden.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll be very brief. Although I do want to mention that the Christmas tree program that we have in Guelph is Trees for Tots, and it's run by the Children's Foundation to raise money for the school programs for kids in Guelph. They raise about $60,000 a year by having 300 volunteers collecting holiday trees and then mulching them, and the mulch goes into community gardens in Guelph. So there is an environmental impact there that's beneficial for our community, and it gets 300 volunteers out doing great things for the kids in our community. Back to the motion, though, I only have one comment, is the $1 billion kind of hit me, that I think we might be getting operational there. I don't know whether $1 billion is enough or if it's too much, or how we come to defend $1 billion. I know it's significant, and it should be a significant fund. But I would drop the $1 billion and just establish a watershed security fund.
So that's your proposing an amendment.
Yeah.
And Mr. Do you see this?
Because
as
it might not be enough, it might be too much, I don't know.
As a friendly amendment, Mr. Bachrach? No. Okay.
As
Sorry,
friendly
and
as
I'm not-
Mr. Longfield
Now we
is,
go and
he's
debate the $1
smiling right
billion.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put spokes in, or a stick in your
We
spokes.
debate the
I
$1
just-
billion now, okay? So anyone want to talk about $1 billion? Yes, Mr. Bachrach?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Longfield. Indeed, it might not be enough, and I think the hope would be that it would grow beyond $1 billion because the need is so great. If you look at some of the watersheds that have been impacted in British Columbia and need restoration, especially the Fraser, which is the largest river system in our province, it's seen tremendous development impacts over many, many years, and also natural impacts. You look at the Big Bar slide just a couple of years ago that almost entirely blocked the Fraser River and caused major implications for wild salmon. You look at the lower Fraser River, like the Fraser Valley, where the flooding we saw last year occurred, and a lot of the impact that we saw was a result, the impact on ecosystems was a result of development over time that hasn't taken into account the impact on natural systems. So there's a tremendous opportunity there to restore those ecosystems, to rebuild the natural resilience, and it's going to take a serious commitment, probably beyond what's articulated here. The $1 billion number comes directly from Mr. Zeman's presentation. I think it's based on, if I recall, a $400 million contribution from the province, an equal $400 million contribution from the federal government, and $200 million that would be leveraged from private investors. And I think this comes back, and I'll look for the chair's indulgence if I just stray down a slight side path here to address one of Mr. Mazur's earlier points about job creation. And I think this is really the potential of this fund, is that if the federal government makes a substantive investment, there's the potential to leverage investment from the private sector, which, when we talk about job creation, when we talk about economic development, leveraging private investment is often an important part of the conversation. So now we're talking about, I've convinced you already? I'm just getting warmed up.
No, your first part of the explanation.
I had you at hello? Okay.
I can withdraw my amendment.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so we go back to the main motion. I have Madame Chatel, Madame Posey, Mr. Bachrach, Mr. Van Koeverden. Okay, Madame Chatel, sur la motion principale.
On the main motion. Thank you very much, Chair. I have 2 points. First of all, would it be possible to highlight what you were talking about, Mr. Bachrach, by saying after for the $1 billion watershed security fund, I would open a parenthesis to include made from federal, provincial, and private sector capital or investments. In other words, to have this specified, because I think this is a very interesting component of this fund, that it would be made up of provincial, federal funds, but also of private sector funds, because government resources are limited and it must be a partnership. So I think that this should be highlighted. That's my first suggestion. Second suggestion would be that after opening up that parenthesis, we add to work with other provinces who would like to implement a similar fund, so that it would not just be for BC, but that we could open the door to having other provinces talk to the federal government about having a similar fund, because I think that yours is a good idea, and I would like it to be able to inspire other provinces. Could you read me the wording of your amendment then?
To also say it in English, after the $1 billion watershed security fund, open a bracket and say made of investment from the federal, provincial, and also the private sector. So made of investment from federal, provincial, and private sector.
Okay,
That would be the first amendment.
after security fund,
Yeah.
composed or made
Made of investment from federal, provincial, and private sector.
of the
Or maybe a government is missing there, but
federal and provincial governments
yeah. And the private sector.
and the private sector. Okay, we're going to debate this. Who would like to speak to this? Qui voudrait en parler? Est-ce qu'on...
Do we have anyone? Yes, Mr. Bachrach?
I'm happy to accept the amendment, Mr. Chair, or to support the amendment. I'm just wondering about the wording, made from, made of, made up of?
Made up of, composé de.
Composed of, yeah. I'm just thinking if we can get the grammar en anglais a little closer, that would be.
Investments from the federal and provincial governments and the private sector.
Read to work with the government of British Columbia to establish a $1 billion watershed security fund, comma, made or composed of investments from federal and provincial governments and the private sector, something like that.
I don't even think you need the comma.
Maybe not even a comma. We could save that for some
Either
other
way,
place.
it's good. Yeah. Okay, so okay, so that's the Madame Chatel's proposed amendment. Mr. Bachrach, did you that was what you wanted to say?
I just wanted to be clear on
okay.
the words, the language, and I'm happy with
Est-ce
that.
qu'il y a d'autres intervenants? Oui, Madame.
Anybody else? Ms. Posey? I would like to say that I'll be voting against this amendment because every time the federal government puts money in it, they end up demanding all kinds of conditions.
Mais est-ce qu'on peut...
Well, can we vote?
Oui, portant sur l'amendement de...
So this is a vote on Ms. Chatel's amendment.
Mr. Ali?
Yes.
So we're voting on the amendment of Madame Chatel, composed of investments from the federal and provincial governments and the private sector. Okay. Mr. Ali? Madame Chatel? Mr. Longfield?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor-Roy? Mr. Vancouverden?
Yes.
Monsieur Deltel?
No.
Mr. Cram?
Against.
Mr. Leslie?
No.
Mr. Mazier?
Against.
Madame Posey? No. Mr. Bachrach?
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, donc l'amendement est adopté.
So the motion is carried. The amendment is carried. So now back to the main motion. I had Ms. Posey. No, there was another amendment from... Chair, there were two amendments. One which has been carried. I didn't know you had a second one. Yes, the second one was, and it's a friendly amendment, of course, to see whether it would be possible to add and to work together with other provinces who wish to implement a similar fund. So that this motion is not simply for BC. So my amendment would be right after what we had just suggested or carried as an amendment, and we would add, perhaps with the comma, Chair, and to work with those other provinces wishing to constitute a similar fund. As I said, it's a very good idea, and I think that it may inspire others. Do we really have to debate this before voting? So let's vote. Vote on the second amendment, as suggested by Ms. Chattel.
Mr. Ali?
Yes.
Madame Chattel? Mr. Longfield?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Vancouverden?
Yes.
Monsieur Datel?
No.
Mr. Cram?
Opposed.
Mr. Leslie?
No.
Mr. Mazur?
No.
Madame Posey?
No.
And Mr. Backrack?
No.
Alors, c'est...
Yeah, 5 yeas, 7 nays.
Alors, c'est défait.
5 oui, 7 non.
La motion principale,
So, amendment defeated, we return to the main motion. Ms. Posey. I'd like to explain why we've opposed. There's a financial issue and an issue of jurisdiction. $1 billion, of course. BC is going to put in $200 million, $100 million, and then the federal government is going to put in money. Are we going to also get $1 billion for our watersheds in Quebec? As we know, Quebec is very water rich, and anything involving water, lakes, rivers, we're talking about 3 times the surface area of France. So Quebec has a lot of water resources, but of course, there are all the industrialization-related problems which have led to pollution of this water, but that's a whole other area. In 2002, I believe it was, with Mr. Bernard Landry's government, they had a national water policy, and that flowed from a commission in 1970, watershed management experience, the Environment Conservation Council, a Quebec Water Management 1997, and a public hearings report on the environment in 1999-2000. So through all this, the Quebec government has taken the watershed organizations and placed them at the very center of water governance models. This is clearly jurisdictional. The motion that we're studying regarding freshwater straddles perhaps the two, but this motion by Ms. Taylor is in the other jurisdiction, and I am therefore firmly against this motion. And because of the reasons I've given earlier, we're really talking about whether or not to respect jurisdiction. And this is crucial. This is very current in this country. And the federal government, through its power to spend, is already putting its nose everywhere. It wants its own programs, its own priorities, its own standards. And then the provinces yield in order to be able to get funding. So true provincial independence is shrinking. And Mr. Taylor's motion is going to make this shrink even more. And we know that there are several provinces currently expressing the very same frustrations as Quebec has. There was a time we were the only ones. But there is a federal interference, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, Ontario, New Brunswick. I haven't even talked about Alberta and Quebec. So for all of these reasons, this power to spend, well, we're going to vote against Mr. Backrack's motion. Mr. Backrack, followed by Mr. Vancouverden.
And you know, I appreciate what Madame Posey has offered. I think the potential here, though, is to really create a model based on a province that is already creating that model. It's to come in as a federal partner, which is something that the federal government does all the time. And, you know, I somewhat reluctantly voted against Ms. Chattel's amendment to encourage the federal government to work with other provinces that are also interested in setting up such funds. But I think the potential here is really to augment and to amplify the work that's already going on in British Columbia, and to create a model that can then be rolled out across the country. And you know, the significance of British Columbia, and this comes back to a question that Mr. Vancouverden asked in his opening remarks, why BC? You know, the Freshwater Action Plan that the federal government put in place in 2017, it includes something like $70 million, I believe. The lion's share of that investment has gone to the Great Lakes, and rightly so. You know, when it comes to freshwater, that's a major concern for Canada. And Lake Winnipeg has received, I think, $25.7 million from that fund. Now, there are three other watersheds that are noted in the Freshwater Action Plan: the Fraser, the Mackenzie, and the St. John's. And yet, those watersheds haven't received funds through the Freshwater Action Plan budget amount that was committed in 2017. And so, obviously, in British Columbia, the Fraser is top of mind as a concern for a lot of folks. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. And like I mentioned at the beginning, part of that opportunity is the fact that there's so many organizations and First Nations and communities that want to do this work. They're raring to go, and they just need a federal partner that's willing to support that work with a financial contribution. And I'll just, you know, and to be fully transparent, Mr. Chair, I represent Skeena Bulkley Valley. It's a riding that is named for the Skeena watershed, which is BC's second largest watershed and one of our most important wild salmon systems. But I grew up in the Fraser watershed, right at the headwaters of the Fraser River. And so the work that's proposed as a part of this, and of course the BC Watershed Security Fund would disperse funds to all of the watersheds in BC, and I think it's really a truly provincial effort. But because it's such a huge watershed, the Fraser is a big opportunity. And I know that they're right from the very top of the watershed to the estuary, there's a lot of work that can be done. So I think that's really why it's worth supporting a motion that focuses on British Columbia, because that's where a lot of this energy is. They're trying to create a new model around watershed governance that looks at watersheds differently. We heard at our last meeting, I think it was, some testimony by one of the academic witnesses talking about the fact that watersheds often don't line up with political boundaries. And so trying to think more bioregionally, trying to think about how we come together around the health of watersheds and work together across communities and across differences to do that work. I think that's the really exciting part of this and why it's really worth supporting. And we're on the original motion, so I can also go back to Mr. Mazur's comment about job creation. And it's true that some of the most direct job creation would come directly from the government investment in this fund. As I mentioned previously, it would also come from the private sector contributions that are leveraged through that fund. But more importantly is the fact that healthy watersheds support all kinds of economic activity and all kinds of jobs. And when we invest in restoring watersheds, when we invest in watershed resilience, there are other economic benefits that are going to accrue from that. If we think about the impact of the flood this past summer on agriculture, there is restoration work that we can do. There is stewardship work that could be funded through this fund that would actually result in better resilience for farmers to withstand future droughts. And then, of course, the jobs that rely on that agricultural activity. In my area, a lot of it is beef and raising cattle, and we saw just absolutely devastating consequences of Class 5 drought this past summer. Farmers are still trying to have hay shipped up from the United States at incredible cost, and there are a few ranchers and farmers that are thinking ahead and thinking about how can they do this work differently, how can they manage their land in a different way. so that they're more resilient against the impact of floods by rotating the grazing of their cattle and working with wetlands on their property and this sort of thing. And I know this is a topic that Mr. Mazier is very passionate about, so that's why I mention it. My point being that I know I'm trying to goad you into more debate here. But the point being that, of course, it's more difficult to measure, but when we make an investment in the resilience of ecosystems, in the resilience of watersheds, there's all sorts of economic activity that will come from that. In the Lower Fraser, we're talking about salmon habitat, we're talking about white sturgeon. There's a massive tourist economy that is based on that. And, I could go on and on at length in terms of the job creation potential here. But, noting the time, Mr. Chair, maybe we can bring this towards a vote. I'm really encouraged by the debate that I've heard so far. I think the work happening in my home province, it makes me incredibly proud that our provincial government is taking this on. And like I said at the outset, and I'll end with this, the biggest potential here is to work on the ground, boots on the ground, to work on issues that matter to communities, that matter to First Nations, and to use that as a catalyst for reconciliation and for building relationships that we can, I think we'll see a lot of benefit from in the future. I've lost the chair's attention. I like looking at you when I'm talking because,
I had a question for Mr. Van Koelen, but
okay.
I'm following. Yeah.
But I think that's the real potential here, is that we have First Nations, we have groups like the BC Wildlife Federation, Watershed Watch, the Polis Project, the BC government, we've got local governments. Everyone's coming together around this idea, partly in the wake of these devastating events that we've seen, this idea of restoring and investing in watersheds. And, I think it would be a real shame if the federal government didn't get behind that and help to amplify that work. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Speaker, and I'm really hopeful that this motion will pass.
Before I go to Mr. Van Koelen and Madame Chatel, a couple of things. One is the notice said that we meet till 1:30. However, if we can get, we don't have to go to 1:30. We go to 1:30 if we're not ready for the witnesses at noon. We have to extend the time unless somebody wants to propose an adjournment. But that's one point. The second point is it was brought to my attention that we may need to modify one word in the motion as a result of the amendment to strike that the committee report this to the House. Because we struck that, it doesn't make sense to say that the government table a written response. We could put that the government provide a written response, because we're not reporting to the House. So is that acceptable that we change the word table to provide?
Just on that point, I think that's fine, and maybe it's to provide to the committee to be clear about.
Okay, provide to the committee a written response.
Yeah, because they're not going to provide it to the House anymore.
C'est bon?
Sure.
On est d'accord? OK. Ben oui, exact.
Yes, that's so.
Suivi de Madame Chatel.
And just very briefly, first, thanks again to my colleague for raising this. I think it's great. It's a great recommendation. It's a great motion. On the topic of jobs creations with respect to conservation authorities in Ontario, being kind of familiar with how it all works, really good conservation authorities aren't government jobs. They self-generate a lot of their own revenue, and they're able to pay their staff without having to rely on government funding. But then the government funding that does go into these organizations protects our local economy. It protects against insurance liability. It protects from flooding, and it protects a lot of things that people might not notice, which is biodiversity, species loss, and these are really important things too that might not have the attention of absolutely everybody. But I'm glad that my honourable colleague from Skeena-Balkley Valley cares about these things. And I think one of the reasons why it ought to be funded by multiple levels of governments is because occasionally you get a government that's hostile.
Point of order, Mr. Mason.
Is the minister coming today?
Well, I wanted to
250
discuss
days.
that as well. He's not coming today.
No, it's been over 250 days, so I just wondered if when he
No,
was
he's not coming today. I believe he's in Dubai.
Oh,
Yeah, he's in Dubai today for COP. But Mr. Van Koelen, I think we're on, to all the committee, we're pretty much in line to start the witnesses at 11, but it's obviously up to the committee how much time we want to take debating this. Go ahead, Mr. Vancouver.
All I was trying to say is that great conservation authorities provide an excellent framework or model for exactly what we're talking here, and good ones do a lot for community, and they're not government jobs. And the reason to have them funded by multiple levels of governments is because the work is so important that it creates stability, because occasionally you'll get a government that's hostile towards them, making sure there's multiple levels of funding for them. For example, in 2021, Conservation Authority was given $9 million from ECCC through the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund. So I'm very supportive of my friend's motion, and I'm looking forward to voting for it. Thank you.
Madame Chatel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Ms. Chattel, thank you, Chair. I'd simply like to say that I'd like to emphasize that all levels of government, federal and provincial, must take care of water. Where I'm from in the Ottawa area, we have hundreds of thousands of citizens. The watershed includes the Ottawa River. One shore is in Quebec, and the other shore is in Ontario. And it's essential. So as far as I'm concerned, I cannot imagine that there are boundaries, political boundaries around watersheds, as my colleague so aptly said. I must insist that the federal government has to become involved together with the provinces and even municipalities and watershed organizations. I've spoken to people from the watershed of my riding, and they need support. They need federal support. So I'm very disappointed that my colleague voted against the amendment, which would have made it possible to have to talk about more funding for people in the Ottawa River area who would have needed it. But I would like to vote on the motion. Can we move to a vote then? Okay, voting.
Yes.
On the main motion.
In favor?
Madame Chatel?
Oui.
Mr. Longfield?
In favor.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
In favor.
Mr. Vancouverden?
Or
Monsieur Datel?
Contre.
Mr. Cram?
Opposed.
Mr. Leslie?
Opposed.
Mr. Major?
Opposed.
Madame Posey?
Non.
Mr. Backrack?
In favor.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Just a moment, please. I have Mr. Leslie on the list here. I do have one very small item of future business that I would like to deal with. It has to do with the minister's appearance, and we can get this over with very quickly and then go to Mr. Leslie. The minister has said he could come on the 14th of December. On the 14th, the first hour is with Imperial Oil. So my question to you is: do you want to receive the minister? Do you want to receive the minister for the second hour? Yeah. Okay. So did you want him here with his officials? Yes. Okay. Well, that was really easy. So that's great. 1 hour. 1 hour.
But the meeting will be a total of 3 hours.
So this is where so this is a proposal that we meet for 3 hours. Is that a unanimous? With the minister, well, the minister and officials, that's what we're asking. Minister and officials for 2 hours on top of the 1 hour with Imperial, which would make a 3-hour meeting. Are we in agreement with this? No, we don't have UC. So I think we'll come back to this later, and we'll go to Mr. Leslie. I thought we could deal with it quickly and just move on, but anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do hope we can get the minister after a long time. In my time here in this chamber, I still haven't had the opportunity to question him, and I look forward to that. And I appreciate the opportunity today to raise one of the motions that we have had on notice. I had the full intention of doing so during committee business prior to us spending an hour to find out that As we indicated early on, we knew how the vote was going to go and what is a laudable motion that I do believe regarding boots on the ground. I will note that one of the first actions this Liberal government undertook was to cancel the Recreational Fisheries Partnership Program, which worked on ecosystem and habitat restoration with this exact sort of mentality, boots on the ground. And I will note that I hope we folks are watching as we spend an hour on grammatical amendments to a motion that ultimately, by the removal of reporting to a House, amounts to nothing. It amounts to us urging the department to do something and them sending a letter back to the ether. We know that's not how policy is made. We should recognize that the government will set its own priorities, and in this case, our urging to set a monetary amount aside simply is not how I expect the government to move forward. But with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the the motion that I have on notice. Given that the Senate is expected to vote on Bill C-234 to remove the carbon tax from grain drying and barn heating. B, Canadian farmers have called upon the Senate to pass this important legislation. C, Bill C-234 would save farmers $1 billion and help lower food prices for Canadians. The committee call upon senators who are delaying the passage of this legislation to stop playing political games with the livelihoods of Canadian farmers, recognize the decision of the elected House of Commons, and pass Bill C-234 into law without further delay. Now, Mr. Chair, the reason that I wanted to do this during committee business, as requested by our colleagues to not disrupt witness testimony, is again the timeliness of this motion as it relates to an upcoming vote in the Senate. We are all, of course, aware that the governing Liberals, with bizarrely the help of the Bloc Québécois, decided to defeat a motion that was before the House of Commons that would urge the Senate to follow the will of the elected chamber. However, it seems the desire to radically increase taxes is stronger out of the Bloc Québécois of late. But this is now before the Senate once again, and following that vote last week, there was yet another amendment to Bill C-234 put forward at the Senate at third reading. And while you might think it is a new amendment meant to aid the bill in some way and try to improve the legislation, the reality is it is an amendment that wasn't just voted down at committee, it was voted down by the entirety of the chamber already. This is not about trying to improve the legislation. This is about Liberal-appointed senators trying to delay and, from their perspective, hopefully kill Bill C-234 because of the money it's going to leave in the pockets of our hardworking Canadian farmers and the fact that it's going to cause political headaches. I don't understand Senate procedural aspects. I have no idea how the retabling of an amendment that was already voted down at the Senate is permissible. However, I will leave that to senators to decide. But farmers have been clear, as evidenced by the thousands of phone calls, emails, and letters that they have been sending to senators over the past number of weeks.
Sorry, Mr. Just a second. Madame Chatel?
Je m'excuse.
My apologies. I did not receive this motion. They sent in this notice of motion quite some time ago. It's an old one? It was from November 17th. Ah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying,
I think I got you.
Well, I've got you yourself, Mr. Deltel, Mr. Van Koeveren.
Okay, thank you.
Could you clarify that hands were up before this motion was
Yeah, they were up. They were up.
And
not before the motion, but they were up.
So is the convention now that if your hands are up?
I'm told
on a
there's no
previous-
convention. It's my decision. That's what I'm told by the clerk. You can challenge that if you want.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, farmers have been very clear in their support for Bill C-234 and their opposition.
I apologize. It's not from the 17th. It's from the 24th. You've put in a new one since the, so it's from the 24th. You should have it. Yeah, it was the 24th. Yeah, here it is. Well, it's the 24th. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, the reason for a new one, as I was stating, is due to the fact that we are once again awaiting a vote tonight, likely at around 5:30, from the Senate on an identical motion to one that was already voted down by that exact same Senate just a couple of weeks ago. And if this could be described as anything other than a Liberal delay tactic, I would be all ears, but there is no explaining away why, once the Senate has already decided that this amendment is not what should be happening and that the bill should be moving forward unamended, to see this happening is so frustrating to Canadian farmers. And that's why they have sent thousands of pieces of correspondence to senators, these unelected, unaccountable senators, who are unwilling to do the right thing and pass the will of this House. Now, I believe it would be very impactful if this committee, the Environment Committee in the House of Commons, would call upon senators to follow that will, to follow the will of our elected members and defend that collective decision that we have made. We can pass this before Christmas. If the senators stop playing games over there, the corn that's still standing that is yet to be dried, that's going to need to be dropped 15 points, we can provide a reprieve to those farmers and start our very best and go home to our ridings with our head held high that we are doing our very best to help lower food prices for Canadians. I urge all of my colleagues to do the right thing, pass this motion so we can get to witness testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mazer.
Mr. Chair, instead of working to remove a carbon tax for Canadian farmers, Minister Guilbeault has jetted off to Dubai. The Liberals don't understand that taxing the farmer who grows the food is taxing those who buy the food. What kind of government punishes farmers for growing food? It's become very clear that Minister Guilbeault has no shame in punishing Canadian farmers.
Excuse me,
In
Chair.
fact, he refuses to...
Sorry, Ms. Roy?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what talking about the minister has to do with the motion that was just brought forward.
Well, it was a bit of that doesn't really directly, but go ahead, Mr. Mazer. Just focus on the motion, please.
Yeah, it was a carbon tax, 234. So, it's become very clear that Minister Guilbeault has no shame in punishing Canadian farmers. In fact, he refuses to show up at this committee to defend his failed policies. It's been over 250 days since the minister showed up at the Environment Committee to answer questions. He continues to hide from Canadians because he knows that his policies are an utter disaster. The solution is to help Canadian farmers. It's called Bill C-234. Bill C-234 will create a carbon tax carve-out for Canadian farmers. We should be working to pass this bill so Canadian farmers can feed the people. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think as MPs we are all aware of the fact that our food banks are increasingly solicited, and I think that's why we have Bill 234 to give some relief to our farmers regarding carbon tax. Very pleased to see that the members of the House of Commons elected by the population voted massively in favor of 234. Very happy to see that the NDP was with us and that the Bloc was with us as well. Now, last week, we found that the bill is being studied by the Senate as per the Constitution on our system, and we also note that there are senators who are talking a lot and making time go on, and meanwhile, there is an excess of demand at food banks. They are overflowing with demand and not with supply. This is a situation where we know that everybody's having a hard time because of inflation. So last week, through a motion and a debate in the House, we asked the Senate to proceed quickly with this bill and bring it back to the House so that we could pass it. They pass it so we could move forward with it. Unfortunately, we have found, as you have, Chair, that the Bloc Québécois has decided to vote against this request. It's their choice. That's up to them if they wish. But it's unusual to see that the Bloc can be in agreement with 234, but also in agreement with the fact that senators should spend all the time possible so as not to pass it. You can't be in favor of democratic principles and then letting senators take us so much time to delay the passing of a bill that was duly passed by the elected officials in Canada. So that's why we want to move to the heart of matters regarding 234. The minister responsible for environment and climate change, we expected that he was able to come to our committee 2 weeks ago, and unfortunately he preferred to participate in all the question periods of the week in which he was supposed to be here. He even spent an hour at the Senate to answer senators' questions. What a great idea to answer senators' questions, especially when he should have been doing that before with the Environment Committee, who had asked him to be in attendance. But he didn't have any time. He had just had time to go to all the question periods and have press conferences and go see the Senate. It's a pity. Mr. Van Koeverden.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
I don't know where to start. There has been quite a lot of thoughts shared with respect to this motion. First, I want to ensure that it's on the record that it is our view that the Senate is independent. They have a democratic right and a professional obligation to ensure that all legislation passed by the House of Commons gets a sober second look and full consideration. You know, my colleague from Wellington Halton Hills, the Honourable Michael Chong, a good friend of mine, has said that this is a tax bill and it ought not to have been considered by the Senate in this regard. But the Supreme Court did actually indicate that carbon pricing does not qualify as a tax. So unfortunately, he's wrong. Not only is he wrong, but the insistence that the Senate do our bidding is also wrong. My colleague said that he's unfamiliar with the way that the Senate does their business. That's fine. It's not up to us. We don't need to become familiar with how the Senate does their business, but it is their business and not ours. And on this side and on every other side in the House, we're not going to be telling the Senate how to do their work. I also want to add that the Conservatives, and by the way, the only senators that sit in a caucus, in a political caucus, are Conservative ones, and they still do.
Right.
So we don't have senators at Wednesday morning caucus. You guys do. The Conservatives do. So you ought to have a conversation with those senators. We don't have the luxury or we don't have senators sitting in our caucus, but the Conservatives do. On the Conservatives, I need to remind them that they ran on a carbon tax scheme with Aaron O'Toole in the last federal election in 2021 that would have imposed the same price on pollution as we have now. So my question to them is, if you're so against it, if they're so against it after 2 years, Mr. Chair, through you, would they have had some revelation 2 years after? Like, hypothetically, if they had won the last federal election and they committed to a carbon price similar to ours that would have imposed it on farmers in the same way that ours has, to slowly nudge along innovations with respect to things like grain drying, you know, irrespective of the fact that the vast majority, 97% of farm fuels are exempt from carbon pricing. There remains a few, as per Bill 234, that are not exempt from carbon pricing, and they include some of the fuels used for grain drying. However, our government's also invested almost $1 billion with farmers to make more efficient and reduce the emissions from grain drying. I like baking sourdough. I've got the numbers for you. It's $500 million in R&D and $493.4 million implemented, and I'll provide you with those numbers, MP Leslie. There's more. I've got a list. I suppose the Conservatives don't listen to my answers.
Through the chair, please.
With all that, my last point is on misinformation. The Conservatives now 4 or 5 times this afternoon have suggested that the minister has refused to come. The minister was only recently invited. And as soon as the minister was recently invited, we have responded with a date of availability, and the calendar with respect to up till his departure at COP was full, and he will be here when he returns from COP, which is an important international environmental conference attended by leaders of various governments from various government stripes, political stripes. I'll leave it there. I hope we can vote.
Mr. Backride.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And, you know, this is ground that we've harrowed several times now. And one of the assertions that the Conservatives are making here, and I won't belabor this point, but one of the assertions that they're making is that the Senate should pass legislation that has been duly passed by the House of Commons. And that is an assertion that I wholly support. Our party, as many folks will know, doesn't support the notion of having an unelected Senate at all. But I would just hope, for the sake of consistency, and perhaps I can pose this through you, Mr. Chair, to my Conservative friends, I would ask them if, in the future, when other legislation is duly passed by the House of Commons on any topic, if they would also vote for similar motions that call on the Senate to swiftly pass the legislation that we as the House of Commons pass. Because if we look at the history of the place, that hasn't been a consistently applied philosophy. So, you know, if it's good for one bill, it's good for another bill. I certainly, you know, maybe where we find common ground is the idea that the Senate should swiftly pass legislation that goes through the People's House and is carried by a democratic vote by democratically elected representatives. I think that's something all of us around the table would come around to. And yet we see that instead there's sort of this game playing that happens where when there are bills that some parties don't like, they try to tie them up or kill them in the Senate. And when there are bills that they do like, they impress upon the Senate the urgency of passing them as quickly as possible. And so it just seems, you know, I think if I was a member of the public watching these deliberations, I would note the lack of consistency. And maybe I'll just call it a lack of consistency to be kind. But I would certainly, I would love to see all of the bills that we pass in the House make their way swiftly through the Senate. And there's some great senators that I quite enjoy and who I think do excellent work and have extremely, you know, illustrious backgrounds. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they weren't elected by the people to be in there. And, you know, so if we're going to entertain motions like this, and really this has nothing to do with the merit of the actual bill, it just has to do with the assertion that we've heard again and again that the Senate should pass legislation that the House of Commons has passed. And so I'll just note that. And, you know, I would hope that we could move on to witness testimony, because I know we're all dying to talk about fresh water today.
Okay, I don't see any, there's no one else on the list. Can we move to a vote?
Mr. Ali,
In favor?
Madame Chatel,
Sorry, are we voting on the main motion? Yeah, the motion. Huh? I'm sorry.
We're voting on the motion, Mr. Leslie's motion.
Okay, I'm sorry. I misunderstood my chair.
Yes.
I thought we're.
I had some hope.
No, I'm sorry. I thought it's a backrack. I vote against.
D'accord, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Madame Chatel, Mr. Longfield,
Against.
Ms. Taylor-Roy, Mr. Vancouverden,
Against.
Mr. Dautel,
Ooh.
Mr. Cram,
In favor.
Mr. Leslie,
In favor.
Mr. Mazer,
In favor.
Madame Posé,
Contre.
Mr. Backrack.
Abstain.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
okay, alors, la motion est défaite et là, on va...
Motion is defeated, and we're going to take a break now so that we can connect our witnesses who have been kind enough to join us for a second time, so as to be able to complete the exchange that we began with them.
Good. Well, I understand we are going to be starting witness testimony for 1 hour here very shortly.
Well, the testimony's been given. It's the Q&A, basically.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do have one other motion that is on notice that I would like to table and speak very quickly to it. Hopefully, we can get a vote and get a full hour of witness testimony in,
Okay,
if that
well,
is acceptable.
Yes.
Speak,
Yeah,
Captain.
okay.
As pursuant to Standing Order 108-1A, the committee order the production of documents related to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change's trip to COP28 in Dubai. A, detailed itinerary. B, meeting details, including the names and titles of the individuals in attendance. 2, meeting notes. 3, purpose of meeting. And 4, outcome of meetings and briefing notes. D, and expenses incurred by the minister. And that these documents be provided no later than December 14th, 2023, which of course marries up perfectly with the minister and our hopes that he will be appearing, the House will not be rising, and we will have the opportunity after 250 days to finally have the minister before this committee. Now, again, I believe this motion is extremely timely, given that the minister is in Dubai currently making a number of major policy announcements that impact this country. There are thousands, tens of thousands of participants, and I think it's very important to know who the minister is meeting with there, what his agenda looks like, who he is trying to influence on the international stage as we work collaboratively to tackle the challenges of climate change, and who he is trying to be influenced by. Now, given that they are living for 2 weeks in an air-conditioned dome of hypocrisy in the desert, I imagine it is quite expensive, high emitting. Now, we might not be able to get to the entirety of the costs of the COP summit itself, but in terms of the spending that the minister is undertaking alongside his, I'm sure, large entourage funded by taxpayers, I think it's important that while there is a significant cost to taxpayers, we deserve to know what the value for that money being spent is. And we can really only tell what is happening there during this very long summit if we are able to be provided this information and the totality of what price we are paying. I know the government originally campaigned on being opened by default, so I hope we can garner support from all members across this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
J'ai Monsieur Maizière.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for my colleague to introduce this motion. The Environment Minister has jetted off to Dubai, leaving Canadians behind in the cold. This hypocrisy is astounding. Minister Guilbeault has no shame in punishing hardworking Canadians with a costly carbon tax. He has no shame with increasing the cost of gas on the mother who drives her kids to hockey practice. He has no shame with increasing...
Point of order. Are we talking about the motion which is just tabled? Or are we talking about the appearance of the minister? No, it's the motion is tabled.
Allez-y, monsieur.
Go ahead, Mr. Mazur.
Do you have the motions from December 1st? It's asking for documents.
De renseignement par rapport à la vie au voyage.
Information regarding the minister's travels. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start over again. Since the Environment Minister has jetted off to Dubai, leaving Canadians out in the cold. The hypocrisy is astounding. Minister Guilbeault has no shame in punishing hardworking Canadians with a costly carbon tax. He has no shame with increasing the cost of gas on a mother who drives her kids to hockey practice. He has no shame with increasing the cost of groceries by taxing the farmer who grows...
Point of order, Mr. Mazur. I do not see how this is connected to the motion that I have before me, which is dated December the 1st. We're not talking about hockey. Can we debate the motion? Yes, it's not really connected. The motion is fairly technical and asks the minister or the department to make public certain information after the fact. The trip is not yet over. I would ask Mr. Mazur to stick to the motion and talk about the relevance of the information that is being requested from the minister.
Well, the relevance is what the impact of the carbon tax is costing. So I'm getting to the point here. It'll be really brief.
We're not talking about carbon pricing. We're talking about travel expenses. These are two different topics, to my mind.
We're talking about is what he's going on in Dubai and what he's talking about. So I'll finish up here, Mr. Speaker. And he has no shame in increasing the cost of home heating on a senior trying to stay warm this winter. But when it comes to himself, he has no shame with jetting around the world, releasing more emissions in 2 weeks than most Canadians will in a year. Canadians deserve to know the details of the Minister Guilbeault's trip to Dubai, including how much it's going to cost. Thank you.
Mr. Vancouver.
I'll withdraw. I think we should vote on this motion.
Posé. Pas là. Madame Posé.
Désolé, Monsieur le Président.
My apologies, Chair. Well, to begin with, this is a notice paper issue in this motion. If Mr. Leslie doesn't agree with the answers, then he can come back with his motion. I remember that we voted a few weeks ago about this. We voted on a similar motion. It wasn't about COP. It was about questions to the minister. And we had said that when the minister comes, everybody could ask whatever questions they believe are appropriate. So I remain convinced of that. If the Conservatives want to ask questions about COP when the minister comes here, they will do so. Liberals will do other things. Myself or Mr. Bachrach will do other things. And he can place them on the notice of motion for supply days.
I came into this debate with an open mind. I think it is worthwhile to know who the minister is meeting with at COP. That's important disclosure, given the significance of the deliberations that are happening there. But listening to the Conservatives' debate, it seems that their intention here is to somehow criticize the government for traveling to an international meeting to discuss a globally existential threat. And it just seems like, given the fact that the climate crisis is a collective action problem that affects every single country around the world, we can't solve it without talking to each other. And, you know, I would bring us back to the debate about hybrid parliament and the indignation with which the Conservatives argued that the only way that we can have Parliament function is if we're there in person. And it's an assertion that I actually agree with, as someone who would benefit greatly from, being at home more and seeing my kids and sleeping in my bed more than 2 nights a month. The point of going to COP at great expense, granted, the point of going to COP is so that leaders can sit down with each other, look each other in the eye, and talk seriously about how we're going to solve this problem. And so the rhetoric around, jet setting around the world and sitting in air-conditioned rooms is frankly, like it diminishes the seriousness of the debate. And I'm all for people having different opinions and different perspectives, but I think Canadians deserve us to be serious on this issue. This is an issue that affects every single one of us. It affects our kids. It affects our grandkids. It affects our economy. It affects our country. And yet to just talk about, like, how dare someone sit in an air-conditioned room just kind of reduces us to the level of kind of grade school, nattering. This is not a serious conversation. We're sitting in an air-conditioned room right now. In fact, most of the rooms we sit in on Parliament Hill are air-conditioned. Those of us who live more than a couple hours drive away fly to Ottawa to engage in Parliament. And yes, that releases emissions. It's one of the realities that we have to grapple with, because the status quo, like, we can live in a system and work to change the system at the same time. The idea that we somehow are hypocrites because we exist in modern society is frankly ridiculous. And so the conversation at COP, I have huge challenges with the way that the COP conference has evolved, and the fact that it's crawling with oil and gas lobbyists, and the fact that it's ballooned to 50,000 delegates, and the fact that it's being chaired by an oil baron who's using it as a venue to make oil and gas deals. All of these things are patently absurd, and I think deserve scrutiny and criticism. But it is vitally important that global leaders, elected officials, and civil society come together on a regular basis to talk about how we're going to fix this problem. And I think underlying the Conservatives' critique of this is, like, underneath it all, is the fact that they don't believe that we should be having a serious conversation about climate. They want to undermine the very conversation about this existential threat because they don't take it seriously. And I think that's really what we're seeing behind all of these interventions, all of these motions, is a lack of seriousness on the issue of our time. And so I won't vote to support this motion as much as I want to know who Minister Guilbeault is meeting with at COP. Because listening to the debate, it's not a serious debate. It's not about transparency. It's not about getting to the bottom of how many oil and gas lobbyists the minister is meeting with or how many environmental groups or what the substance of those conversations is. It's an attempt to discredit the entire global effort to get to the bottom or to get at how we're going to tackle this collective action challenge that we face. And I would note that if you look at the delegations coming from Canada to COP, it includes a lot of folks who have a pretty different perspective than I do on the climate challenge and the climate crisis. So I'll leave it at that. I spoke about 10 times longer than I intended to, Mr. Chair, but obviously I have some strong feelings about where this, the disingenuousness with which this motion has been brought forward.
Merci, Monsieur Van Koeverden.
Mr. Van Koeverden.
And I could not have said it better. My colleague expressed exactly what I was thinking over here, just that the premise of the motion is fine. Accountability, transparency, good. But when Mr. Mazur went on a tirade about the legitimacy of flying to a meeting, when we all flew here, I'm pretty sure, except for maybe Madame Chatel and Madame Taylor-Roy drove. And I drive sometimes too, and I'm lucky. And Gerard Deltel has an electric vehicle, I might add, because he's an environmentalist in his own right. Yeah, and we're not counting carbon credits over here. But my point is, in order to have an impact, Canada is responsible for 1.5% of global emissions. That's something that the Conservatives love to remind folks. Oh, we're just a small player in the emissions world. That might be true. I would also add we're 0.5% of the global population, so it means that on average, each of us sitting here has triple the carbon footprint of a average global citizen. That's significant. Why do we show up to these meetings? Leadership. Because we can have an impact if we're in the room. And yesterday, instead of being here, as the member so eloquently put, the minister announced that Canada was the first ever country to commit to reducing our oil and gas emissions with respect to methane by 75%. That's a global first. Canada stood up. We took credit. We were given a lot of credit. And a lot of organizations out there in the environmental, non-governmental organization space are saying Canada's on the right path. And other countries are going to follow suit. If the United States does the same thing, as they've indicated they might, that's massive. You know why? Because the United States is responsible for like 30 or 40% of global emissions. And a lot of methane. And methane's 80 times worse than CO2 when it's put into our environment. Thankfully, it doesn't last as long, but it's really, really bad for global warming. It has a negative impact on our environment. So why do we show up to important meetings? To be leaders. We already know that the Conservatives do not want to lead on climate change, despite having run their last election on a promise to price carbon. After that election, they lost, and members of their caucus flew on airplanes over to Europe to meet with the Danube Institute, which is a far-right group, which is a bunch of climate deniers, to drink Chateaubriand, eat oysters and porterhouse steaks, paid by climate deniers, climate change deniers in the Danube Institute, in a far-right context. Mr. Speaker, we all have a carbon footprint, and we all have an obligation to lower it by showing up. Canada was the first country in the world to set this ambitious target to lower our methane, oil and gas sector emissions below 2012 levels by 75% by 2030. That is significant progress. And I'm willing to stake a Chateaubriand dinner, if you'd like, maybe on Spark Street, on the fact that he's not done yet. He's over there to continue to lead. And I, for one, am really proud that we've got an environmental activist as an environment minister. Because when I was a kid, I grew up watching David Suzuki on TV. I grew up reading the Owl magazine. and I grew up wanting to be an environmental champion. And on this side of the House, we can confidently say that we are. The Bloc can say that, and so can the NDP, and so can our Green members. The Conservatives cannot.
Monsieur Deltel.
Yes, we can. But the point is, Mr. Speaker, the point is that, very easy to set big, ambitious target while you never get it. This is exactly the track record of this government, Mr. Speaker. They have never gained, never attacked, ils se sont jamais rendus là où ils devaient.
They never got to where they were supposed to be. The only G7 country which increased rather than decreased emissions. That's what our balance sheet looks like after 8 years of Liberal government. Last year, the UN concluded that after 8 years, Canada was the 58th out of 63. The only times where goals were achieved or there was a reduction was during COVID. Well, I'm sorry, but if you want to shut down your economy again, don't count on us. So everyone has their own approach. But after 8 years of rhetoric and all kinds of preaching all over the planet, no results. And that's what we see after the Liberals. So what an ambitious announcement that we yesterday made. We have a very high target and we're going to be the world leaders when it comes to ambition. It might be more credible if you were a leader, a global leader in results rather than in announcements. But everyone has their own game plan. When it comes to methane, Chair, I'd like to say, and I don't think I'm the only one, last week I met with a group attacking methane pollution. It's very interesting. And the federal government has made studies which are positive, likewise for the provincial government. Point of order?
Witnesses waiting online, or are they in person?
Okay, c'est bon.
They're not online yet because, Sorry?
There's some online and some.
So there are some online, some not. But, yeah.
Je vais simplement rappeler le fait qu'on peut avoir des branches.
I would simply like to remind us that we can make very ambitious announcements, but you have to have action that speaks louder than words. And in terms of methane, the provincial government gave a green light to it, and the federal government did. But then you still have the major emitters who have to get to work, and we hope they do. Thank you.
Mais écoutez,
Mr. Longfield said what I was going to say. There are some witnesses online, and some are not. Can I call for a vote so we don't have to have them come back a third time? Well, I think there are no further speakers who have asked for the floor, so we can vote.
Mr. Ali?
Against?
Madame Chatel?
No.
Mr. Longfield?
Against.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Against.
Mr. Vancouverden?
Against.
Monsieur Datel? Mr. Cramp? In favor. Mr. Leslie?
In favor.
Mr. Mazier?
In favor.
Madame Posey?
non.
Mr. Backrack? 7 nays, 4
Donc
yeas.
la motion est défaite.
Motion is defeated. We'll take a break so that we can connect the witnesses who are not already. last week. So, just as a reminder, we have in person with us again Professor Diane Oriel. Thank you for being with us. Online, we have Professor Beatrix Beisner and Wanda McFadden and Marc Hudon. Let's begin with Mr. Cram. You have 6 minutes.
Excusez-moi.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm going to adjust the time because to take advantage of the fact that we have the witnesses, instead of 5 minutes, it'll be 6 minutes each and 3 minutes for the Bloc and the NDP instead of 2 minutes.
5 minutes. Alors,
Instead of 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Cram.
Mr. Chair, thank you to all the witnesses for rejoining us here today. I would like to begin with Dr. Beisner and Ms. McFadden. In the previous meeting, both of you had similar statements regarding, both of you had statements to the effect that watershed boundaries do not necessarily match jurisdictional boundaries. So as the Canada Water Agency is in the process of setting up its head office and its regional offices across the country, would it make more sense for the regional offices to match up with jurisdictional boundaries, or would it make more sense to have them match with watershed boundaries? Dr. Beisner and Ms. McFadden.
Sure. Since you said my name first, I'll go first. I'm not an expert on political aspects of these things, but my feeling would be that there is some sense in having it correspond somewhat to jurisdictional boundaries just because that's where the money and decision-making comes from. But on the other hand, of course, I do think that these units have to work together. Je m'excuse, je devais parler en français. J'ai complètement oublié.
I apologize. I should have been speaking in French. I forgot. I think that there is a reason to think that it should be jurisdictional, political, but it is important to also consider the natural boundaries.
Je pense que
I think that Ms. McFadden has more experience in this area than I.
would you like someone else to answer? Ms. McFadden?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee member for the question. In regard to office location, you have existing buildings and staff in place. So I think given our virtual world and our ability, they can work transboundary in existing watersheds that are there, being cognizant of those particular watersheds. For example, the Winnipeg office is located, of course, in Winnipeg, and it's located within the Lake Winnipeg Basin, which covers a large chunk of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Northwestern Ontario. So I think recognition that they are working within those areas, whether the agency is developed to work within those larger watersheds like Lake Winnipeg, Mackenzie, Nelson, etc., needs to be looked at. I think there also needs to be recognition that some of those water bodies here on the prairies in the area I work, the International Souris River Board and the International Red River Board also exist because those watersheds also extend into the U.S. So you have the International Joint Commission in place along the Canadian-U.S. border that works in those water bodies, be it the Great Lakes or those water bodies such as the Souris River. So it's important that they also liaison with those organizations, but be cognizant of watersheds because they all merge together. Lake Winnipeg is comprised of 4 major watersheds. So I think that is going to be important moving forward for a successful agency.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. McFadden.
If you're interested, Mr. Hudon has his hand up if you want.
Okay, if you would like to chime in, then I certainly won't object.
Yes, thank you. A brief comment. I agree with what's been said. in terms of the administrative side of managing a watershed there with the political boundaries, but in terms of social involvement and community involvement for those who are living within the watersheds, it's important for citizens who are part or will be part of these new geographic limitations to feel that they are part of this and directly involved. If the boundaries are too great in terms of the administration, citizens may lose interest in becoming involved more directly and in a more sustained fashion over the years in terms of the implementation of this. Thank you.
Okay, well then maybe I will follow up with Mr. Hudden on that one. At an earlier meeting, we heard from Daniel Wolfish of the Canada Water Agency, and he explained that in addition to the head office in Winnipeg, there would be regional offices in Vancouver, BC, Burlington, Ontario, Toronto, Ontario, Gatineau, Quebec, Quebec City, and Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Mr. Hudden, do you hear any, or do you see any watersheds in the country that are not represented in the list of regional offices that I just mentioned? And to the other witnesses, too.
Just quickly like this, does it cover the Arctic region? Does it touch the Arctic region?
No, it doesn't look like there are any in the Arctic region.
Okay. I don't know. Other than that, that's the only one that comes to mind quickly.
Okay. And quickly to the other two witnesses.
Can you just repeat the list again?
Yes, it was the head office in Winnipeg, and then we had regional offices in Vancouver, BC, Burlington, Ontario, Toronto, Ontario, Gatineau, Quebec, Quebec City, and Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
I would concur. It's Mr. Chair. I would concur with Mr. Hudon that yes, we need to look at the Arctic regions and those watersheds in the north. They certainly in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, those watersheds in Alberta are reliant. We rely on those for hydroelectricity, as does northern Quebec and probably northern Ontario. I'm assuming that Dartmouth would also look after Labrador and Newfoundland as well. So it's important to recognize those, whether they can be worked out of the existing offices, but not to forget them and the communities and the citizens that live within those. It's very important that they are engaged. Thank you.
Et de mon point de vue, je suis d'accord que
On my end, I agree that the far north should be involved, especially with climate change. A lot of water already on the territory is frozen, so it will melt, and that will create new ecosystems. So we have to have a longer-term perspective as well with the movement of species. And thank you very much. Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today again. My question is to Ms. Beisner. I understand that Canada-Quebec agreement for the St. Lawrence expires in March of 2026, and that a new agreement will be renegotiated. Do you have any thoughts on some of the key considerations that should be included in the update? Can you tell us more about provincial government initiatives in Quebec to protect and restore fresh water and particular areas where you see there being a need for more collaboration?
Oui, Je pense que j'ai répondu en partie à cette question.
I think I've partially answered that question last time. Again, saying that my expertise is in ecosystem and ecology, not so much the political system. Perhaps Mr. Hudon could talk to the implication of the involvement of citizen groups. I think it's essential in the management of the St. Lawrence. I can talk more about internal waters in Quebec, for example, with the watershed organizations. It's one of the management methods for waterways in Quebec that I think is very useful It involves all of the stakeholders in the area. As Mr. Odo said, it's essential to have people who are in the area be involved. I think one of the problems that we have with watershed organizations is that they were not always funded sufficiently to implement the plans that they had developed together with local actors in the regions. They have to be supported with money. It's fine to have all kinds of conversations and all kinds of plans, but if there is no money behind it so as to implement these, it's not really very useful other than to have interesting conversations, perhaps.
My next question is to Ms. Orhill. Can you tell us about barriers to addressing some of the water issues you are finding in your research? What ways do you think the federal government could help address those challenges? And are there any innovative solutions you have seen in other jurisdictions to address some of these challenges?
Thanks very much for your question. So you asked, what are the barriers to my research or to the tailings pond issue? Could you clarify whether it's a question about my research or is it a question about the tailings ponds?
I'll repeat that question again. Can you tell us about barriers to addressing some of the water issues you are finding in your research? That is the first question.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. So in my research group, we study the effects of naphthenic acids on fish and frogs. Naphthenic acids are the chemicals in tailings ponds. They are the major source of toxicity, not the only source of toxicity, but the major source of toxicity. We know that naphthenic acids break down very slowly. They're very persistent. We know that at the concentrations of naphthenic acids in tailings ponds today, it is lethal. Organisms die within minutes to hours, if sometimes days. At lower concentrations, when we expose developing fish, developing frogs to these naphthenic acids, they have sublethal effects on reproduction, on growth, on behavior. We see abnormalities in fish, such as cardiac malformations. We see brain malformations. When we expose tadpoles, we see amphibians with deformed limbs. So what are the barriers to dealing with this issue? The barriers are there doesn't seem to be the will, the framework, the push to actually do anything about this toxic waste that's been accumulating on the landscape for 50 years and continues to accumulate. Thank you.
Are there any innovative solutions you have seen in other jurisdictions to address some of these challenges?
Great. Yeah, excellent question. So we've been mining oil sands in Canada since the late 60s. And so for 50 years now, engineers, scientists, academics have been working at developing treatment technologies, figuring out ways to improve the efficiency of extracting bitumen from ore, figuring out better ways of increasing water reuse in the industry, ways to flocculate tailings, dewater tailings. There's also been a lot of work to figure out how to detoxify the industrial wastewater that we refer to as oil sands process affected water, or OSPW. These technologies can be chemical in nature or they can be biological in nature. So chemically, there are advanced oxidation technologies that have been developed to basically break down all the organic compounds in tailings ponds. On the biological side, there's microbes and wetland techniques to be able to do similar things to degrade the compounds. Personally, the technology that I've been most excited about and I've worked on in my lab is a titanium dioxide microparticle. I was excited by this new technology for cleaning up the tailings pond because it can basically blast apart the naphthenic acids that I work on that I know are toxic to aquatic organisms. It uses a passive photocatalyst. Basically, these beads sit on top of tailings ponds and use the sun, energy from the sun to be able to catalyze this process. And in my lab, what we've done is we've exposed fish to either tailings pond water or tailings pond water that's been treated using this titanium dioxide photocatalyst. And I should credit Dr. Frank Gu here. His lab developed this technology. I'm just the ecotoxicology that's testing it.
We just have to wrap up, but I really want to know what the conclusion is. It's like a thriller movie here.
I'm sure someone else will ask me about it.
No, please finish.
Okay, if you allow me to.
Yeah.
So what we find is once we treat oil sands process affected water using this titanium dioxide photocatalyst, we can remove the acute lethality of the water. But what we find is if you only partly break down those compounds, you can actually create more toxic breakdown products. So you really have to degrade all of those compounds down to be able to basically have the same endpoints as we see in our control fish that are not exposed to oil sands process affected water.
Can we get the documents forwarded? Like, I don't know how to ask for that. But
Yeah, sorry, we're done here with the question.
Yeah, like just what
Can
she
we
was
get
referring to.
what did you want? Sorry.
I just wanted to ask if she can send a written
Yes,
response.
please, if you could send a written response.
On her recommendation, what the federal government to do to address.
If you could send a written response on your recommendation for how the government should deal with, I guess, tailings pond processed water. And sorry, Mr. Mazier?
Well, I was just on that research that you were talking about, like what were the conclusions, what to watch out for.
Yeah.
And then you were referring to like the toxins off of tailing ponds. That data, where did you get that as well?
Okay. If you could let us know, and some written, it would be very valuable for our work. We'll go now to Madame Posey.
Oui, merci, et merci à nos témoins d'être.
Thank you, and thanks to our witnesses for coming back, either in person or on video conference. Ms. Beisner, I saw that there were categories in the watersheds, subsheds, fluvial watersheds, and ocean watersheds. Are any of those watersheds ones that should be given priority?
Question.
Yes, that's a good question. I'm not sure that we know definitively, from a scientific point of view, which would be the best. But I could tell you a little bit about our research. As I mentioned last time, we had a Canada-wide project funded by the federal government, and that was to sample 650 lakes across Canada. And we were able to begin to answer that question. I can talk about some of the beginning of that. We studied every aspect of water that we could. We had small plankton animals that we saw, and we noted that we were looking at the impact of the environment, the quality of habitat on the communities of these small organisms. We were looking at ecoregions, in other words, regions defined by the type of forest, the climate, and we were able to explain some of the composition of these communities. So we had some certainty in terms of what we would expect to see in each of these types of lake. But when we move to a broader scale with continental watersheds, if you look, in other words, at which ocean this water is flowing to, I think we had 5 or 6. We have 5 or 6 in Canada. There's a very small continental watershed flowing to the Gulf of Mexico. Briefly, please. But we were in a much better position to explain what was happening with these communities. So these large watersheds are very useful predictively. Apologies for having to rush you, but I only have 3 minutes, so thank you for your answer. I'd also like to hear what you have to say about something else. Some water experts feel that there should be a very frank conversation about conflicts in the use of the water resources. And this has already been referred to by a previous speaker. In terms of conflicts of use, we talked about economics, the infrastructure. Now we're talking about biodiversity and preserving water. Just a few very brief words, please, regarding your impressions about conflicts of use. Yes, usage conflicts are huge. This involves drinking water. I think Quebec City, and we have Lac Saint-Charles. There's a lot of fighting over how the water gets used. So this is why we have to organize people who are active in a given watershed that affects a waterway of interest. But, you have to bring all the actors together to talk about their expectations, especially with climate change that's coming. Do you have an additional comment you'd like to make, Mr. Hudon? Yes, if I may. If I can give you an example with the St. Lawrence Plan in Quebec, this was a mechanism that made it possible to mitigate all kinds of usage conflicts when it comes to using the water that flows in the St. Lawrence and also at the mouth of the Evelyn territory. And these communities living along the river, we have mechanisms now which were created over 20 years ago, and these contribute to viable development of this majestic waterway that is the St. Lawrence River. Thank you. Could you perhaps send us some details about these mechanisms? Mr. Hudon, before we turn the floor over to Mr. Bachrach, could you send us a few words about these examples of mechanisms that you've just mentioned? Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for coming back. This is really interesting testimony. Dr. Oriel, I was reading on your Wikipedia page that the magazine Nature dubbed you Lady of the Lakes after your work to save the experimental lakes area. And I was just remembering studying at the University of Victoria limnology with a fellow named Rick Nordine, and he told us about the importance of the experimental lakes area. Of course, the experimental lakes area the funding for it was cut under the Harper government. And so perhaps I'll start just by thanking you for that really important work. Part of this study is dealing with the tailings ponds, and you may be familiar with the testimony that we heard from a number of witnesses on that topic, including most notably the Alberta energy regulator. And I think one of the pieces that's been missing is sort of a sense of the scale and scope of the issue in a national context. From your testimony today, it sounds like there are some promising treatments for tailings that could be employed. I'm keen to know, and maybe you can just talk for the rest of the time, providing the committee with some context that we can include in the report. I'm keen to know how much tailings are out there on the land base, how the tailings ponds in the oil sands region rank in terms of environmental liabilities in this country, how much of the tailings are currently being treated, and what the long-term plan is for this area. I've flown over the oil sands, and it's absolutely astounding the scale of what's involved. I know there are lots of environmental liabilities in this country, not just from mines, but from other developments as well. can you just provide the committee with a bit of a high-level sense of what we're dealing with here?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So I'll back up right to the beginning with, am I allowed to use a whiteboard to just draw a very quick picture?
Why not? But
Is that, okay. So I'll just draw a picture like this. Okay, so this is the cross-section of the Athabasca River. All right? So the oil sands sits kind of like this near the Athabasca River. The oil sands are shallow. So near the Athabasca River, we can, oil sands are mined with surface mining, big pits. Further away from oil sands, the deposit where the deposit is deeper, 200 meters or so, that's where we can use, that's where the industry uses in situ techniques, where they can basically go down and have to blast it out from here. So the tailings pond issue that we're talking about is only an issue in the surface mining area right beside the Athabasca River. Okay, that's the first thing to understand. And why are the tailings ponds there? Well, to be able to, when you're mining, you just have a bunch of rock, okay? And you want to be able to get that bitumen out of the rock. So the industry figured out how to basically boil it. You boil it up, and they're able to take off that bitumen layer. You need a lot of water to be able to boil up and extract out the bitumen. So that's why there's a need to extract water from the Athabasca River. When you're boiling it all up, you're not only pulling out the bitumen, you're creating this like tailings slurry. That tailings slurry has to go to a tailings pond and settle. That overlying water, like once it settles, can be reused, and it can go back into the processing. And actually, to the industry's credit, they've increased the rate at which they recycle the water over time. But the problem with this recycling, reusing the water over and over again, is that it becomes more and more contaminated every time it goes back. And so even though it makes sense from a policy perspective to encourage the industry to recycle their water, what it's created is a big problem. These massive ponds on the landscape of highly toxic water. Highly toxic water. We're not talking about subtle effects. These are animals that are in contact with this water, land on this water, die. These are not subtle effects. And these are just open systems. Like these tailings ponds are basically mines, yes. Mine pits. They're not a sealed unit. They leak. There's drainage ponds around that they leak into and pump.
We've been in the interest of fairness,
Yes.
I've let the time go because it's very interesting. But I have to go now to Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I think we need more whiteboards around this committee. That's I strongly encourage that, actually. I would actually just like to start with Mrs. McFadden, given that the Assiniboine is quite literally my backyard. Our family farm is almost due south of the Assiniboine River. The Hoop and Holler that was cut in 2011, the first field that it went on to was one of our fields. So I am acutely aware of the impacts of overland flooding and the lack of potential availability of water. Obviously, it's critical to irrigation area for vegetables, for the value-added processing in my hometown of Portage la Prairie with Simplot, McCain's, Roquette, and of course, drinking water to various nearby communities. And, Manitoba's one of our heroes, I would say, is Duff Roblin. The foresight that he had for a relatively small amount of money back in the 60s to build the Portage Diversion and a number of other physical water management tools has paid off 1,000 times over in terms of protection of both farmland and physical structures and entire communities. And I'm of the view that we're going to need a similar round of that as we have continuation of ebbs and flows of water availability and as we look to seek economic prosperity across our rural areas. So my question to Ms. McFadden is, I guess, first of all, having looked through the future demand expectations, how do you think we can go about managing the future demand requirements out of the Assiniboine, recognizing the challenges of that, and what role does the federal government have to play? What would you recommend in the sense of cost-sharing models that the federal government could step up and support the major infrastructure projects we need to manage our water in your region?
Mr. Leslie, Committee Chair, thank you. With respect to future demands, as you know, Mr. Leslie, the Assiniboine covers the Qu'Appelle and Souris subbasins as well as the Assiniboine. Currently, there is a Prairie Province Water Board in place, which is a federal member and provincial representatives that deal with apportionment and water quality. When we speak to what's going on in the landscape right now, we are, in essence, in the Assiniboine moving into a dry cycle or a drought again. Talking to landowners and those that work at the grassroots level, the conversation goes back to small off main stem reservoirs that can assist producers, local communities. Those cost money to build as well as to maintain. We're not talking large structures like the Shellmoth Dam that's in place in Manitoba on the Assiniboine, or the Grant Divine or the Rafferty dams. We're talking off main stem opportunities to allow producers and communities to take advantage of those spring runoffs or those rains, to also control flooding, but also have water on reserve at times of dry cycles.
Thank you. Just has there been any major federal investment in the past 8 years towards water management projects? And secondly, just to get two questions in at once, your thoughts on the potential Treeherne Dam project that has been on the books for many years and seems to ebb and flow in terms of its availability. What impact could that have in terms of water retention for our economic needs for drinking water, particularly as we have potatoes shifting acres, so that we could better manage those water on the landscapes?
From a federal perspective, the Lake Winnipeg Basin Initiative was developed and delivered projects out there, but focusing on water quality, certainly that would impact the Lake Winnipeg side of things. The government of Manitoba has set up a conservation trust for the local watershed associations to access for a project base to work with landowners and communities. So that's in place. But those are all very small projects. When you talk about the Treeherne Dam, that's a much larger project, impacts landowners as well. And it's a very much a larger project. When you start talking about some of those projects, there is considerable investment in it. Needs to also have, if there's a willingness or a want from a federal perspective, it should also have some federal support in that regard.
Do you think, I mean, would a project like that or any similar project across the country, is it possible to move forward as the province municipalities alone without federal support? And what if you had to put a percentage on what the federal government would need to come in with, what would you stake that at?
I would, some of those larger projects have become cost prohibitive to municipalities and the provincial government. It needs to be a tripartite agreement to move forward. It depends on the scope of the project and the size. I can't necessarily put dollars in it, but it should be a cost share with the province and the federal government. Municipalities are strapped, as you know, in the rural areas of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Tax base is getting smaller and smaller as farmers move to larger centers or citizens move to larger centers. So you're already strapping that municipality from a tax point of view. So it's imperative that on these fronts that both the provincial and federal governments come forward.
Thank you. And just quickly on the international components, is there any concern, given so many of our waterways flow through the United States as well, that the collaboration between the two countries may be at risk of breaking down, and we could see water being retained in the United States side, not flowing through? Big picture going forward, is there kind of general concerns about the inter-jurisdictional boundaries that they cross?
There have been for some. I can't speak for Eastern Canada. Here on the western part of the world, I know they're working on some. Columbia has been a point of contention. We've not seen it yet in the International Souris River Board. The Souris River is unique in the sense that it starts in Saskatchewan, goes into North Dakota, and comes back into Manitoba. So it crosses that international boundary twice. Under the guidance of the International Joint Commission, which is longstanding, they work on water apportionment based on natural flows as well as water quality. Certainly the red in Manitoba flows from North Dakota, Minnesota into Manitoba. So as we get into various situations, you're probably going to see concerns raised with regard to water flow across international boundaries. I think it's imperative that the new Canadian Water Agency does not work in a silo, but works with other organizations such as the International Joint Commission, which is responsible for those waters along the Canadian-U.S. boundary, including the Great Lakes.
Thank you. Mr. Longfield.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for returning to have this discussion. I'm going to start with Mr. Hudon. I've sat on some committees prior to being elected federally. I sat on a few citizenship committees at the City of Guelph, where we were looking at our wastewater study, which eventually became a 50-year wastewater plan. We also looked at Guelph's water supply strategy. Guelph was part of water was part of our community energy initiative of how to reduce our water use per capita by 50% while we increase our population by 50%, because Guelph is fed by groundwater, so we have a limited capacity for water in Guelph. Many people say that water is a governance issue. The Forum for Leadership on Water has provided us information as a municipality to help with our governance in a municipal context, which also then has to connect to other levels of governance through provincial and national governance. We have the Ontario Waterworks Association, Water Canada. It is a complex area. Could you maybe comment on the water as a governance and what we can do federally to try to help coordinate with agencies such as the one that you work with?
Je suis pas certain que je comprends bien la question parce que.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question correctly because I don't work with the agencies per se, but when it comes to government, I was involved for the St. Lawrence Plan.
Instrumental in making collaborative initiatives with the provincial government. I have seen this kind of work done on the Ontario, in the province of Ontario also, through the RAPS. I don't remember, it's been quite a few years since, but the key issue, even at that level, is to have l'acceptabilité sociale, social acceptability, and to feel that the population is being understood, taken into account, and supportive of whatever level of government is involved. Municipalities are they're key. They're the closest one to the people.
Thank you. Maybe for me to clarify with you, where I was coming from was the Forum for Leadership on Water. You're listed as a member of that forum. The forum has a very diverse membership. Groups like FLOW are critical in our understanding of the water needs locally, including municipal water needs. So your involvement with the other agencies, how can the federal government look for agencies like FLOW to help us with our water strategies?
Well, I guess I could reply in writing, maybe it would be better, but I guess to use active organization on the ground within each provinces. We know who are the champions. In Quebec, you have the Réseau des organismes de bassin versant du Québec. You have the ZIP committees. In Ontario, you have as many organizations. You have to use what is existing and what has proven over the years to be instrumental in adapting to whatever new challenge came up.
Thank you. And anything in writing to show us that not to forget about the Forum for Leadership on Water as a key partner would be beneficial, maybe for both of us. And now I'm going to go to Dr. Orihel and the work that you've done on the Experimental Lakes area. That was a canoeing area of mine when I grew up in Winnipeg. when the funding was cut, it was something that I felt very personal about the opportunity that we were going to lose on keeping data on the health of our lakes and our wetlands. Could you maybe comment on the importance of long-term funding in keeping long-term data around freshwater in Canada?
Absolutely. Thanks very much. So there's kind of two facets to speak to. First, there's monitoring, long-term monitoring, so monitoring lakes over time in the same way to see how they're changing. And then there's also long-term experiments. And at the Experimental Lakes area in northwestern Ontario, we've been doing both for over 50 years. So in terms of funding, long-term funding is so essential because people like me who are academics, our funding cycles are on a scale of a couple years. You can't do large-scale, long-term experiments on NSERC funding cycles. You can't do long-term ecological monitoring of lakes on NSERC funding cycles. This really needs to be done. Dedicated funding, dedicated people that stay the same through and securely through time.
OK. Alors, là-dessus, j'aimerais remercier encore une fois.
I would like to thank our witnesses once again for having made themselves available to be able to continue this conversation, which was so interesting and rich in terms of its details. I think a lot of information has come through, and it will be useful to us in our work for our report. So thank you again. Thank you, Ms. Oriel, for being here in person, and thanks to our witnesses who are participating via video conference. It's been extremely interesting and very pleasant to exchange with you. Thank you, and have a good rest of day.
Before you adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was hoping to have a question before we adjourn, but since we won't, I would just like to re-raise my motion from last week with the Alberta Energy Regulator motion, as it was discussed but not fully debated. I'd like to bring it back to the agenda on Thursday, first thing. I can read the motion if you'd like, or I can just ask that it be on the agenda first thing for Thursday.
Well, the agenda is I believe it's set for Thursday, is it not?
Yep.
Yeah, so you would have to move it at some point during the meeting. Well, you're moving it now, you'd still have to move it again, because we're at 1:30 and the resources are limiting it's limiting our ability to continue meeting today. We're basically done in 4 minutes. You'd have to move it again on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. So we'll adjourn now. Thank you.
you.